first thing Eli Mercer heard was not the roar. It was the silence. The cattle had stopped moving. The goats had stopped knocking against the feed rails. Even the guinea fowl, those nervous little alarms of the yard, had gone still in the yellow heat beside the broken windmill. Then Eli saw the lion. He stood beyond the lower fence, half hidden in the red grass, his mane dark around the shoulders, his ribs lifting slowly with each breath. Beside his front paws, pressed into the dust beneath an acacia shadow, lay a cub, not dead, not safe. The cub's hind leg was twisted under a loop of wire. And between the lion and the house, moving on old trembling legs, was Eli's blind cattle dog. "Boone," Eli whispered. The old dog did not turn. He had not turned toward a voice properly in almost a year. His eyes were white with age, his muzzle silver, his body thin beneath the rough coat that had once carried rain, mud, and burrs from one end of the ranch to the other. But he was walking straight toward the lion, not running, not barking, not wagging his tail, walking, as if he knew exactly who waited in the grass. Eli's daughter-in-law, Mara, stood frozen on the porch with one hand over her mouth. Behind her, the ranch hands had stopped near the water trough, rifles still locked in the cabinet because Eli had never allowed guns to hang easy on the walls. The lion lowered his head. A warning traveled through his shoulders before any sound came out. His tail flicked once, hard and low. His eyes did not leave the dog. Eli had seen enough wild animals in his 71 years to know that one wrong movement could break the world in half. He raised one hand to the men behind him. "No one moves," Eli said. The line was quiet, but everyone heard it. Boone kept walking. The lion's lips lifted just enough to show teeth. Not a full snarl, not attack, a boundary, a message written in muscle and breath. The cub gave a thin, dry cry, and Eli saw it then. The wire around the cub's leg was not ordinary fence wire. It was blackened, sticky in places, and tied with a green cloth strip that snapped in the wind. That strip did not belong to the Savanna. It belonged to a man. For one long second, the old rancher forgot the lion, forgot the cattle, forgot the people watching him from the porch. He saw only another rainy season 12 years earlier, when Boone had dragged a half-drowned lion cub out of floodwater and dropped it alive in the lambing shed. Back then, Eli had believed the past could be survived if you kept your hands busy. Now the past had come back with teeth. The lion stepped forward once. Boone stopped. The old dog lifted his head into the hot wind and breathed in. Then, from somewhere deep in his worn-out chest, he gave one low sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a recognition, and the lion went still. That was the moment everyone on Mercer's Dry Creek Ranch understood. The animal at the fence was not simply hunting. He had come for something. Or he had come because something terrible had followed him. By sundown, Eli would discover that the snare was poisoned. By midnight, he would learn the snare line crossed his own land, and before the next morning broke over the acacia flats, his blind old dog would stand between a full-grown male lion and the one person Eli had spent years refusing to see clearly, his own son. Mercer Dry Creek Ranch sat on the edge of a fictional reserve called Savanna Bend, where the grassland lowered into a wide seasonal wash, and the acacia trees grew crooked from years of wind. It was not a pretty ranch in the way postcards liked to lie about ranches. Its roof tin was patched in 3 colors. The cattle rails leaned. The water tanks wore rings of rust. The land had survived drought, storm, disease, and men with folders who came from larger ranching companies offering clean checks for dirty reasons. Eli Mercer had refused them all. Not because he was noble every day. Not because he always knew best. Eli was stubborn, proud, and sometimes cruel in the quiet way old men can be when grief has hardened around them. He could apologize to an animal faster than he could apologize to family. He could splint a calf's leg at midnight, but he could not say to his son, "I was wrong," even when the words sat burning in his throat. His wife, June, had understood that weakness better than anyone. She had died during the flood year. That was the year the Savanna River rose out of its banks and tore through the wash like a living wall. Fences vanished. Calves disappeared. A ranger truck flipped near the crossing. For 3 weeks, every man and woman in the district measured life by what could be dragged to higher ground before the water took it. Boone had been 7 then, strong and red-coated, with ears too big for his head and a habit of deciding for himself what needed saving. On the second morning after the flood crested, Boone had refused to come back from the lower shed. Eli had cursed him, whistled, shouted, thrown a rope at the mud wall, and finally followed. The dog stood in the rain beside a heap of reeds jammed against the lambing pen. At first, Eli thought it was a dead goat. Then the bundle moved. It was a lion cub, soaked to the skin, mud in its nostrils, one eye swollen shut, too young to understand anything except hunger and cold. The flood had likely separated it from its mother somewhere upriver. No one ever found tracks of the pride nearby afterward. Eli had not wanted that cub on his land. A lion cub was not a barn cat. It was not a thing a man rescued because it looked small and helpless. Even small wild animals carried a future inside them, and that future could grow claws. But the reserve roads were gone. The nearest wildlife center was cut off, and June was still alive, then, wrapped in a raincoat, standing in the shed door with water running down her face. She had looked at Boone, then at Eli, then at the shivering cub, just until the roads open, June had said. Eli had agreed because he loved his wife, because the dog would not leave, and because sometimes mercy arrives at the worst possible time and gives a person no clean way to refuse it. They kept the cub in the old lambing stall for 9 days. No one petted it. No one named it officially. June reminded every visitor who came to help with flood repairs that the animal was not a pet, not a miracle, not a story to brag about. But Boone lay outside the stall every night. The cub pressed against the lower boards for warmth. Boone pressed back from the other side. When the cub cried, Boone lifted his head. When the cub swatted through the slats with soft, clumsy paws, Boone stepped away, then returned. Eli pretended not to watch, but he watched. On the 10th day, the reserve team came in a mud-splattered truck and took the cub to a rehabilitation enclosure beyond Savanna Bend. The cub was released months later, far from the ranch. Once he was old enough to move with other young lions. June never saw the release. Fever took her before the dry season returned. After her funeral, Eli stopped speaking about the cub. Boone did not. At least not in words, because dogs have better ways of remembering. For years, whenever thunder rolled over the wash, Boone limped to the old lambing stall and lay outside it, nose to the gap under the door. The family changed after June died. Eli's son Caleb grew sharper than distant. He had wanted the ranch sold when his mother passed. He wanted a life with paved roads, air conditioning that never failed, and money not tied to rainfall. Eli called that softness. Caleb called it sanity. Neither man knew how to grieve without turning grief into blame. By the time Caleb married Mara, he had already begun spending more days away than home. He spoke often of investors, development, fencing contracts, drought insurance, and how sentiment did not pay feed bills. Mara stayed because she loved the land more honestly than Caleb did, and because she had seen goodness in him once before resentment learned his voice. Boone grew old through all of it. He went blind slowly. First he bumped the tack room door. Then he missed steps. Then he stopped chasing cattle and began sleeping in patches of shade where he could smell the yard from every direction. Eli built him a low ramp to the porch, but never admitted why. The dog's world became scent, vibration, habit, and memory. That was why, on the afternoon the lion returned, Boone knew before any human did. The first clue had come at dawn. Boone refused his food. The second came an hour later, when he stood facing the old lambing shed and trembled, nose lifted toward the wash. The third came just before noon, when the cattle bunched near the north rail, instead of spreading toward the lower grass. Even though the wind carried no storm and no visible predator moved along the ridge. Eli noticed all of it. He ignored most of it. A man can spend a lifetime learning the land and still miss what he does not want to see. By late afternoon, the lion appeared at the fence with the cub. He did not charge the cattle. He did not circle the goats. He did not move toward the chicken yard or the open water tank. Instead, he stood at the same break in the lower fence, where the floodwater had once rammed debris into the rails 12 years earlier. The old floodgate, the old route, the old place where Boone had once found a half-drowned cub. Mara saw that detail first. She had been keeping ranch records since Caleb stopped caring enough to keep them straight. She knew the fence map, the repairs, the weak places. She also knew Caleb had ordered new wire 3 weeks earlier, but never showed her where he used it. When she mentioned the wire, Eli's face closed. "Not now," he said. He did not mean to silence her, but grief and pride often use the same voice. Near the fence, Boone remained still. The lion lowered his nose toward the dog, but did not close the distance. He breathed hard. The cub cried again, weaker this time. Flies gathered around the snared leg. The wind shifted. Eli smelled it then. Not blood, not just fear. A bitter chemical scent lay under the dust, faint but wrong, like old pesticide left open in a shed. Mara whispered from the porch, "That wire's treated." Eli did not answer, because deep in his chest, beneath the fear of the lion, and the fear of what the ranch hands might do, another fear had opened its eyes. That green cloth strip on the snare looked familiar, too familiar, and somewhere beyond the ridge, an engine turned over, then went quiet. The safest thing would have been to call the reserve authorities, lock the house, keep everyone back, and wait. Eli did call. The radio answered in bursts of static. A storm front had moved over the eastern relay, and the ranger post at Savanna Bend could hear him only in pieces. Adult male lion, cub injured, possible snare, Mercer Dry Creek, then the signal broke. The nearest response truck was at least 2 hours away if the road held, longer if the wash filled, and the sky over the eastern flats had already turned the bruised green color that came before hard weather. 2 hours was too long for a cub with poison in its bloodstream. But moving toward a wild male lion protecting an injured cub could turn one death into 4. That was the terrible arithmetic of the Savanna. Compassion did not erase danger. Good intentions did not calm a lion. A human life did not become less fragile because the reason for risking it was beautiful. Eli ordered everyone inside except Mara and 2 hands who knew how to work a gate without shouting. Caleb was not there. That absence sat strangely in the yard. He had been gone since morning, supposedly checking the far boundary, but his truck was not visible on the ridge road. And when Mara tried his phone, it rang from somewhere inside the equipment shed. She found it under a folded tarp. Beside it were wire cutters with black residue on the jaw. Mara carried them to Eli without speaking. The old man took one look and felt his stomach turn cold. He still tried to protect his son from the shape of the truth. "Could be from anything," Eli said. Mara's eyes did not harden. That would have been easier. Instead, they filled with the exhausted sadness of someone who has been waiting for a lie to collapse. "Eli," she said softly. "He told me last night the ranch would be worth more if predators became a problem." The words landed in the yard heavier than thunder. At the fence, the lion growled, not at them, at the wind. He turned his head toward the dry wash, nostrils wide, mane lifting. Boone turned too, blind eyes fixed on nothing, body angled toward the same direction. Another clue. Both animals had caught a scent the humans had not. A moment later, from the lower grass, a jackal burst across the open ground and stumbled hard near a clump of thorn. It tried to run again, then collapsed. No one moved. Mara covered her mouth. Eli knew then the poison was not only on the snare. Something had been baited. Something meant to draw scavengers, predators, anything hungry enough to investigate. A dirty method, cruel, illegal, and reckless. It was also effective if a man wanted lions blamed fast. The lion at the fence lifted his head and roared. The sound rolled through the ranch like a door being torn off the sky. It rattled the porch screens. It struck Eli in the ribs. It made every person there feel suddenly small and temporary. But the lion still did not come through the fence. He stood over his cub and watched the wash. That was when the story changed shape. The lion was not cornering them. He was guarding the cub from something behind him. Eli made a decision that would have sounded foolish if explained to anyone far from that yard. He would not approach the lion. He would open the old floodgate, not the main cattle gate near the house, not the wide one that would invite chaos. The old lower floodgate opened into a narrow sorting lane between two heavy rail fences. In earlier years, they had used it to guide frightened animals away from rising water. If opened carefully, it could create a corridor. Enough space for the lion to move his cub closer to shade, but not enough for humans to crowd him. It was not safe, but it was less foolish than marching into the grass. Mara understood before he finished pointing. She fetched the long hook pole from the feed room. Eli took it with hands that looked older than they had that morning. The ranch hands wanted to help. Eli refused, not because he was brave, because if this went wrong, he did not want young men paying for his family's sins. He moved slowly toward the floodgate. Each step stirred red dust around his boots. Boone stayed between him and the lion, as if the dog's failing body still remembered the work of holding a line. The lion watched Eli. His ears were forward, then sideways. His tail moved once. His mouth opened slightly as he tasted the air. The cub shifted and cried, and the lion lowered his muzzle to it, not tender in any human way, but attentive, urgent, alive to the cub's distress. Eli reached the gate latch. The metal had not been used in years. It stuck. He pulled with the hook. Nothing. The lion took one step forward. Mara said from behind him, "Eli, stop." He did not stop. He set his boot against the post and pulled again. Rust screamed. The latch gave. The old gate swung inward 6 inches, then a foot, then wide enough to open the sorting lane. The lion did not move into it, not at first. He stared at the gap, as if gaps made by humans could never be trusted. Then Boone did something no one expected. The old dog turned away from the lion and walked into the lane first. Blind, limping, breathing hard, he crossed the threshold and stopped under the shade of the rail fence. He did not call the lion. He did not look back. He simply stood in the path, an old scent in an old place, showing that the opening did not bite. For 12 years, Eli had told himself Boone was only a dog. But in that moment, The dog carried the memory of the ranch better than any human there. The lion lifted the cub by the scruff. The cub whimpered. The snare wire dragged, scraping dust. Slowly, with the weight of every eye on him, the adult lion stepped into the lane. No one cheered. No one spoke. No one mistook it for trust. It was not trust. It was need measured against danger. The lion moved halfway in, then stopped, blocking the cub with his body. The wire stretched behind the cub's leg, caught on something in the grass outside the fence. That was why he had not carried the cub away. The snare was anchored. Eli saw the line now, thin and dark, running back into the thorn bush beyond the gate. Someone had staked it deep. The cub was not just caught. It had been placed in a killing path. Before Eli could think what to do, a truck appeared on the ridge. It came fast, sliding in red dust, headlights flashing though the sun had not yet set. Mara turned. Eli turned. Boone lifted his head. The lion dropped the cub and faced the ridge. Caleb Mercer's truck came down toward the ranch with a rifle case bouncing in the passenger seat. And Eli, for the first time in many years, felt no anger at his son, only fear of what the boy had become. Caleb stopped hard near the equipment shed and stepped out before the dust settled. He was 42, but in that light he looked both younger and older than himself, young in his panic, old in the bitterness around his mouth. He took in the open floodgate, the lion in the lane, the gathered people, the wire cutters in Mara's hand, and his father standing with the hook pole. For 1 second, all his stories failed him. Then he reached for anger. "What are you doing?" Caleb shouted. "That thing's inside the fence," the lion answered with a low, rolling growl. Not because he understood the words, because Caleb's voice was sharp, his body rushed forward, and fear moves like a challenge when it forgets humility. Eli stepped toward his son. "Stay back," he said. Caleb laughed once, empty and harsh. "Now you listen? Now you decide to protect the place." The ranch hands moved behind Mara. No one touched the rifles. No one wanted the wrong ending to begin. The first crack in the truth had already opened with the wire cutters. The second proof came from the truck bed. A roll of black snare cable lay half-covered under a feed sack. Beside it were green cloth strips, cut from an old tarp, the same green as the marker tied to the cub's snare. Mara saw them. Caleb saw her see them. The storm wind pushed across the yard, carrying the bitter chemical smell, stronger now. Eli's eyes moved from the truck bed to his son's face. "Tell me you didn't," Eli said. It was not a command. It was a plea. Caleb's jaw trembled before he tightened it. "You don't know what they offered," he said. No one needed him to say who they were. The big ranch company had sent letters for months. Clean paper, polite signatures, promises of buyouts, boundary consolidation, predator control, drought security. Words that looked harmless until they touched land. Caleb had not set snares because he hated lions. That would have been simpler. He had set them because he hated being trapped by a life he believed had stolen his mother, his youth, and his future. He wanted the ranch declared unsafe. He wanted predator incidents recorded. He wanted pressure. He wanted Eli cornered into selling. And because greed rarely calls itself greed, he had named it survival. The emotional confirmation came not from Caleb's mouth, but from Boone. The old dog left the sorting lane and moved toward Caleb's truck. He sniffed the rear tire, then the bumper, then the open tailgate. His body stiffened. Boone knew that scent, not as evidence, not as law, as the same chemical bitterness riding on the cub's wire. The lion watched the dog move. His mane lifted in the wind, his eyes fixed on Caleb now, not Eli, not Mara, not the cattle. A wild animal does not understand betrayal in the human sense, but he understands threat. He understands scent. He understands the body that carries the smell of pain. The lion took one step forward. Caleb's hand moved toward the rifle case. Eli shouted, "Don't." Caleb froze for half a breath. Then he grabbed the case anyway. Everything happened slowly. After that, the way disaster often feels slow to those who are about to remember it forever. Mara cried out for Caleb to stop. The ranch hands backed away from the lion's path. The cub tried to stand and collapsed. The storm wind slammed the gate against its chain. Eli moved toward his son, but his knees were not young enough. The lion lunged. Not full attack across open ground. A short, explosive surge from the lane. A warning charge sharpened by pain, poison scent, and the cub's cry. Caleb dropped the rifle case and stumbled backward, and Boone stepped between them. The blind old dog planted himself in the dust directly in the lion's path. His legs shook, his head was low, his body was too small, too old, too breakable to stop anything by force. But force was not what stopped the lion. Scent did, memory did. The lion halted so suddenly dust rose around his paws. His head lowered. His nostrils flared over Boone's back. The sound in his throat changed from a roar to a hard, uneven breath. No one there believed the lion was tame. No one believed Boone commanded him. But something older than command passed through that narrow space. The smell of wet wood, lambing straw, flood mud, a dog sleeping beyond boards, a small cub surviving a night it should not have survived. The lion did not forgive Caleb. Animals do not perform human forgiveness for our comfort. But the lion paused, and that pause saved Caleb's life. Eli reached his son and pulled him away from the rifle case with a strength he did not know he still had. For the first time since June's funeral, Caleb did not fight him. He folded, not dramatically, not cleanly. He simply sank to the ground beside the truck, breathing as if he had been running for years. Eli stood over him, shaking. The old man could have cursed him, could have struck him, could have asked why and why and why until the sky split open. Instead, he looked back at the cub. The snare wire was still anchored beyond the gate. The poison was still moving. The lion's restraint would not last forever. Truth without action is just another kind of cowardice. Eli turned to Mara. "Call again," he said. "Tell the reserve team we have poison, snares, and a live cub. Tell them to bring a dart team and antitoxin." Mara nodded, already moving. The radio caught signal in fragments as the storm rolled closer. This time, a ranger named Tomas Hale answered from Savanna Bend, fictional, local, and close enough to know the Mercer land without needing a map. His voice came through broken but clear enough. "Keep distance. Do not approach the lion. We're coming from the South Road." Eli looked at the sky. The South Road crossed the wash. If the rain hit first, the rescue truck would not make it. That left one more decision. The snare anchor had to be cut before the floodwater rose, or the cub could be dragged, trapped, drowned, or poisoned beyond help. No one could safely walk past the lion to cut it. But the wire ran outside the fence, through the thorn, anchored near the old flood post. Eli knew another way. The drainage culvert under the rail, narrow as a grave and half filled with sand. A man could crawl through it from the cattle side and reach the anchor without crossing directly in front of the lion. A younger man could do it faster. Caleb heard Eli explain it and lifted his head. For 1 second, father and son looked at each other across all the years they had wasted. "I'll go," Caleb said. Mara turned sharply. "No." Caleb did not look at her. He looked at the cub, then at the lion, then at Boone trembling in the dust. "I set it," Caleb said, and his voice broke on the words. "I'll cut it." Eli wanted to refuse, not because Caleb did not deserve danger, because Eli suddenly understood that punishment and responsibility are not the same thing. One destroys, the other may yet leave a person human. He handed Caleb the long-handled cutters. "Slow," Eli said. "No heroics. You crawl, you cut, you come back." Caleb nodded. The lion watched every movement. Caleb dropped to his stomach near the culvert and pushed into the dark. The storm reached Resch as he disappeared beneath the fence. Rain hit the dust in hard black circles. The smell of earth rose. Thunder moved over the wash. The cattle began to bawl from the upper pen. The lion stood over the cub, rain darkening his mane. Boone remained between the lion and the humans, too tired now to do anything but breathe. Eli knelt beside the old dog but did not touch him, not with the lion so close, not with the wild boundary still alive between them. "Easy, boy," Eli said quietly. "You've done enough." Boone's ears moved at the sound. In the culvert, Caleb dragged himself through mud, roots, and the smell of the poison he had placed. He reached the anchor post just as water began trickling along the drainage cut. His hands shook so badly, he missed the wire twice. The cub cried again. The lion's head snapped down. Caleb set the cutters on the cable and squeezed. The first bite failed. He squeezed again. The cable snapped. The sudden release whipped the wire through the grass. The cub jerked, but came free of the anchor, the remaining loop still around its leg. The lion reacted instantly. He seized the cub by the scruff and pulled it deeper into the sorting lane, away from the loose cable, away from the poison bait, away from the open wash. Caleb crawled backward, coughing mud. When he emerged, he did not stand. He lay in the rain beside the fence, covered in the earth of the land he had tried to betray. And for once, Eli did not tell him to get up. The rescue team arrived 47 minutes later, just before the wash became uncrossable. Their truck came without sirens, without shouting, without the kind of human noise that turns fear into tragedy. Tomas Hale stepped out with 2 wildlife medics and a dart specialist, all moving low and slow, reading the lion before they read the people. Eli told them everything, not the polished version, not the family version, everything. The poisoned bait, the snare cable, Caleb's role, the cub's condition, the lion's behavior, Boone's history with the flood year cub. Tomas listened without romance in his face. Men and women who work around wild animals learn not to decorate danger just because it has touched the heart. "This lion may be the released cub," Tomas said carefully, "or he may not. We can't prove that tonight." Eli looked at Boone, soaked and trembling under the rail. "No," Eli said, "but Boone knows something." Tomas did not argue. The darting took patience. They could not sedate the cub first because the adult male stood too close. They could not dart the male too aggressively because he might fall on the cub or bolt into the storm. For nearly half an hour, the team waited for a clean angle while rain drummed on tin and the whole ranch seemed to hold one breath. At last, when the cub shifted and the lion turned his shoulder to block the wind, the dart specialist fired. The dart struck the adult lion high in the flank. He spun, snarled, and lunged 3 steps, but the drug worked gradually. He staggered near the far rail, fought sleep with the stubborn force of a wild thing that had survived everything by never surrendering quickly, then sank into the wet grass. No one cheered. The cub was sedated next. The medics moved fast. They covered the lion's eyes, checked breathing, monitored time, and cut the wire from the cub's leg. The wound was swollen and ugly, but not beyond saving. The poison had entered through abrasions, and the cub needed antitoxin, fluids, and careful transport. Mara helped hold a light. Eli stood back because he had been told to stand back. That may sound small, it was not. For a man like Eli, who had spent his life believing love meant stepping in with his own hands, standing back was a kind of surrender, a necessary one, a respectful one. He watched professionals do what compassion alone could not. Caleb sat under the porch roof, wrists muddy, face hollow. No one had tied him. No one needed to. The law would come. The reserve authority would file charges. The ranch company would deny any knowledge of illegal snares, as companies often know how to deny the things they benefit from. Consequences would arrive in papers, courtrooms, fines, and years of rebuilding trust that might never fully return. But that night, the only verdict that mattered breathed shallowly under a medic's hands. The cub lived. Near the fence, Boone lay down. Eli noticed too late. The old dog had spent the last of himself, standing where no creature his size should have stood. His breathing was soft now, almost hidden under the rain. Eli lowered himself beside him. This time, the lion was sedated, the boundary held by trained hands and distance. Eli touched Boone's wet head. The dog's cloudy eyes stared past him into nothing. For 12 years, Boone had carried the memory of the flood cub. He had carried it without speeches, without pride, without needing anyone to understand. And when that memory returned in the body of a full-grown lion, Boone had not tried to own it. He had simply stood in the space where violence might have happened and gave the world one more second to choose differently. Eli bent close. "Good dog," he whispered. It was too small a phrase for a life like Boone's. But dogs have always accepted what humans can barely say. Boone exhaled once, long and tired. Then he was still. No one spoke for a while. Even Caleb wept without covering his face. At dawn, the storm passed east, leaving the ranch washed clean and raw. The rescue truck had remained through the night, unable to cross the flooded road. The adult lion recovered in a reinforced transport enclosure, under watch, separated from people, quiet but alert as the sedative wore down. The cub slept in a heated crate, treated and breathing. By midday, the team moved them to a remote holding area inside Savanna Bend Reserve, far from ranch fences and roads, where the cub could recover before any release decision was made. Eli did not ask to visit. That surprised Mara. It surprised Caleb more. But Eli understood something he had failed to understand years earlier. The fact that a wild animal had crossed your life did not give you a claim over it. The fact that mercy had once passed between species did not make the wild yours to revisit whenever loneliness asked. A week later, Boone was buried under the acacia, near the old lambing shed, not inside the yard, not out in the open pasture, under the tree that stood between the human place and the wild grass. Caleb attended in silence. Charges were pending. His marriage was cracked. His father's trust lay in pieces. But he came with a shovel, and Eli let him dig. That was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was a beginning measured in dirt. 3 months later, the first rain softened the wash again. Eli was repairing the old floodgate when Mara called from the porch. She did not shout. She knew better now. Eli looked up. Beyond the lower fence at the edge of the red grass stood a dark-maned lion, not close, not waiting to be touched, not offering a miracle, just standing where the wild begins. Beside him, thinner but alive, was a young cub with a faint limp. The cub sniffed the wind, then vanished into the grass. The adult lion remained a moment longer, head lifted toward the ranch. His mane moved in the warm air. His eyes passed over the yard, the shed, the acacia, the place where Boone was buried. Then he turned away. No roar, no farewell, no human ending forced onto an animal life. He simply walked back into the savanna with his cub beside him, and the grass closed behind them. Eli stood at the fence until the light changed. For the first time in years, he did not feel the need to call anything back. Some stories about wild animals tempt us to make the animal smaller, so our hearts can hold it more easily. But a lion is not more beautiful because it acts like a pet. A lion is beautiful because it remains what it is: powerful, cautious, dangerous, devoted to survival, and bound to a world older than ours. The mercy in this story was never about owning the wild. It was about recognizing a life in trouble and helping without pretending that help creates control. Boone, the old blind dog, did not tame a lion. He did not command the Savanna. He simply remembered a kindness from long ago and stood still long enough for people to choose responsibility instead of fear. And maybe that is the quiet lesson here. Compassion is not the same as closeness. Love is not the same as possession. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do for a wild creature is help from the proper distance, call the right people, repair the damage humans caused, and let the animal return to the life it was born to live. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Do you think Boone saved the lion, Caleb, or Eli most of all? And if you enjoy emotional wildlife stories told with respect for animals and the wild places they belong to, consider subscribing. There are more stories waiting out there in the dust, the rain, and the long silence between one heartbeat and the next.